We now return to the Peter Schiff Show.
Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF.
That's 855-472-4433.
Rebel Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Peter Schiff Show. Tom Woods in for Peter. About to be joined by Tom DiLorenzo momentarily. Tom is, I don't know, like an expert on everything, whatever it is. U.S. history. He's great on labor unions, antitrust, agriculture policy, like whatever, every scam that's out there, he favors. But while we're reaching Tom, I want to jump back into, I'm just addicted to David Stockman these days, whom we were having on Friday. I've got a little bit more stuff here. Let's carry on, because the only problems with him, I don't want to suggest that anybody's infallible on this earth, but the only problems are that, if anything, he doesn't go far enough, like in what he's recommending that we do. Now, for most of the population, he goes much, much too far. So this is this position I find myself in a lot, that, yeah, I agree, there's a problem with the recommendations. It's that they're not bold enough. They're too tame. Well, they'd be much, much too bold for most people. But, for example, he says that one of the things we need to do is he says it, meaning getting us back to sanity, would require, finally, benching the Fed's central planners and restoring the central bank's original mission to provide liquidity in times of crisis, but never to buy government debt or try to micromanage the economy. Getting the Fed out of the financial markets is the only way to put free markets and genuine wealth creation back into capitalism. Well, that's fine as far as it goes, but I guess as I get older, I'm more and more skeptical of the whole, we got to get back to the way things were in the golden age. We got to get back to the founding fathers. We got to get back to the Constitution. We got to get back. And nothing ever happens, right? I mean, maybe there was something wrong with the original situation that led us to where we are now. So maybe it's unstable to try to just get back to that, because that obviously didn't work. It got us to where we are now. So likewise, why would we think that it's a stable equilibrium for society to go back to the Fed's original mission? The Fed's original mission, once you have the Fed going, there's nothing to stop it from morphing into what we have now. The only way to stop it from morphing into what we have now is to not have it in the first place. So I don't go for this, well, gosh, the Fed has helped all the crony capitalists, and all the crony capitalists support it and desperately need it, and they couldn't live without it, and they need the cheap credit and all that. But we'll just keep it on a short leash. Why would that be believable? So I mean, he goes through and shows the carnage, absolute carnage, caused by the Fed. But then at the end, it just comes back with, well, if only we could get the Fed back to what it was originally supposed to do. Maybe what it was originally supposed to do isn't necessary either, and maybe it can't be kept to that. So maybe the best way to keep it tied up is to not have it. So then likewise, we get this. And so I just want to get these out of my system so that then it can be nothing but unvarnished praise from now on. But he says, secondly, it would require a renunciation of crony capitalism and its first cousin, Keynesian economics, in all its forms. Now, that's fine. I have no disagreement there. He says the state would need to get out of the business of imperial hubris, economic uplift, and social insurance, and shift its focus to managing and financing an effective, affordable, means-tested safety net. Okay, now see, I think this is also a problem, because that's how the welfare state got started, as an affordable, means-tested safety net. I mean, that was the idea originally. And then it turned into what we have now, where a huge chunk of the population is on it, people get trapped in it, it leads to all kinds of self-destructive behaviors, and all the criticisms that you've heard of it are true times 100. But it all started with these modest little beginnings. So Stockman wants us to go back to the modest little beginnings. That is not a stable equilibrium. There's a natural tendency of it to expand and grow. So we had a guest on this program, I don't want to mention any names, probably about a year ago now, who was a right-of-center free market guy, and said, we just need to get back to a basic safety net. And I said, can you name me any country in the world that has just a basic safety net like you're describing, where the welfare state didn't develop from a small safety net into the gargantuan systems we have now? I mean, is there one example that you can point me to? And of course, I knew the answer to my question. Of course, there isn't. So so that's why I'm saying we need to go farther than this, because these original supposedly ideal conditions are what got us to here. So instead of returning to those, we have to return to something different. We have to come up with something different, so we don't just repeat the same old events that have gotten us in all this trouble. So anyway, so that's the criticism. But I mean, for heaven's sake, the guy has done yeoman work here up to now. And so I'm going to overlook that because I'm only going to have about 20 minutes with him on Friday here on the program. So I want to really nail down for the listeners. I mean, I want to know exactly, explain for the audience exactly how is it that the Fed harms the average person? How is it that the Fed specifically helps the 1%? We hear this a lot. Well, gee, if you're against the cronyism in the 1%, then surely you should be against the Fed. Well, let's see exactly what is the connection. He has got case after case, item after item on precisely this. And he says, incidentally, his view of the financial crisis is that there is no reason to think that in the absence of the bailouts, this would have turned into the Second Great Depression. It would have spread to Main Street. There would have been no way to prevent this, that we would have had the ATMs go dark and people wouldn't have gotten their payroll checks wouldn't have gone out and all. No. This was all entirely scare tactics. And he gives you piece of evidence after evidence after evidence on this. He refers to it as the single most shameful chapter in American financial history. He calls it the Great Fear, capital G, capital F. And he says, and this was manifested by the stock market plunge when the House voted down the TARP bailout before caving and passing it. He says this was purely another Wall Street concoction. He says, had President Bush and his Goldman Sachs advisor, also known as Treasury Secretary, Henry M. Paulson, Jr., stood firm, the crisis would have burned out on its own and meted out to speculators the losses they so richly deserved. The Main Street banking system was never in serious jeopardy, ATMs were not going dark, and the money market industry was not imploding. And these are all claims that we've heard, and phony baloney evidence has been advanced for them, but in this piece and in his book, Stockman is not accepting any of it. He yields no ground whatsoever. He says the state wreck ahead is a far cry from the great moderation proclaimed in 2004 by Mr. Bernanke, who predicted that prosperity would be everlasting because the Fed had tamed the business cycle, and as late as March 2007 testified that the impact of the subprime meltdown, quote, seems likely to be contained. Instead of moderation, what's at hand is a great deformation arising from a rogue central bank that has abetted the Wall Street casino, crucified savers on a cross of zero interest rates, and fueled a global commodity bubble that erodes Main Street living standards through rising food and energy prices, a form of inflation that the Fed fecklessly disregards in calculating inflation. Now, incidentally, it's worth noting here, not too long ago, I think just a matter of weeks ago, Paul Krugman in the New York Times had a commentary in which he talked about why we can't appoint to various government offices people whose predictions were grotesquely wrong. Forecasts about the economy were grotesquely wrong. And yet, Krugman himself did nothing but cheer when Ben Bernanke came to the Fed. And Ben Bernanke he wants Bernanke to be on for as many years as possible, and he continues to cheer him, and this is the guy we need, and we got to stick with Bernanke. But can you think of anybody in public life who deals with the economy who has been more consistently wrong? So, of course, Krugman violates his own rule. I'm sure he's going to lose a lot of sleep about his inconsistency there. But physician, heal thyself. Of all points for Krugman to make, the Krugman, the Bernanke cheerleader, this is really a bit much. Now here's another point from the Stockman piece. He says that the policies that we've seen have brought America to an end-stage metastasis. And he says that the way out would be so radical it can't happen. And that's more or less the conclusion that I think I've drawn, I probably Peter has drawn, that when you think about what would be necessary at this point, would there be people who would be willing to go along with it? I mean, would there be people who would be willing to accept the changes that would be necessary? Well, my view is that it's not going to matter whether they're willing to accept them. They're going to have to accept them because we're dealing with reality here. And if the federal government really is this much in debt when you add in the unfunded liabilities, and the economy has been deformed by year after year of Fed involvement, which skews investment decisions and skews production decisions and creates a systematic phoniness throughout the economy that needs to be purged and corrected. These things are going to happen. So it's not a matter of we need to approve them. They are going to happen. But in the short run, before these things do happen spontaneously, I don't think it will be possible to implement policies that will address these things in advance, before they happen, before the crisis really hits. Will we be able to anticipate it and deal with it? Well, this is the problem of government intervention and Fed intervention, that you start with a little bit, the economy gets addicted to it, and as time goes on, you realize that if you were to unplug it now, it's all the harder to deal with the consequences because it's now so entrenched and so large and people are so accustomed to it, it becomes hard to unplug and to reverse. All right, so that's a little taste of the David Stockman piece from the New York Times and from his great book, The Great Deformation, which I urge you to buy. It's coming out Tuesday, April 2nd. That's tomorrow. So check that thing out. Now, in the meantime, I got Tom DiLorenzo coming up, and we're going to talk about his book, Organized Crime, The Unvarnished Truth About Government. So stick around, everybody. Tom DiLorenzo next on The Peter Schiff Show.
Most of all, someone said true love was dead, and I found a fall
The Peter Schiff Show.
for you.
To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America.
We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
All right, everybody, we are back on the Peter Schiff Show. Tom Woods in for Peter, joined right now by Thomas DiLorenzo, a great hero of mine, economic historian, economist, historian, all these things put together. He's written, of course, path-breaking revisionist works on Abraham Lincoln. Not allowed to do that, but he went ahead and did it. For example, his book, The Real Lincoln, which was an absolute sensation when it came out over 10 years ago. And right now, in addition to his dozen or so other books, he's got a brand new volume for us called Organized Crime, The Unvarnished Truth About Government. He teaches economics at the former Loyola College, now Loyola University in Maryland. Tom DiLorenzo, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
Hi, Tom. Happy April Fool's Day.
Yeah, thanks. I know it. I don't know what to say about that. There are too many easy jokes, but I want to jump right in here to your book, which came out a little while ago. You talked about it at the Austrian Economics Research Conference a couple weeks ago, or a week or so ago. And this is a book that just covers so much ground in so little space that it seems like you should be charging more for it, in my opinion. But I want to jump right into, for example, you've got 6 sections in this book, and it's all about different aspects of government, and it takes a revisionist look. It's not what the average person has been taught to believe. And I want to start with an area that I think events have more or less overtaken it, and that is labor unions, because unionism is really going out the door here. I mean, it is on its way out in terms of numbers. But even still, I think kids in school learn a certain series of ideas about unionism, and you are basically teaching the exact opposite. So can you elaborate on this?
Well, Ludwig von Mises once wrote that the main purveyors of the anti-capitalistic mentality of his day were labor unions. And so if you're wondering why so much effort is being made to keep the whole labor movement mythology going, I think that's one of the reasons for it. And but yeah, you're right. It's only in the private sector. It's only, I think, 6 or 7% of the workforce is unionized. But in the government sector, of course, I think it's more like 55 or 60%. And that seems to be the overwhelming objective of all state and local governments now, is to protect the pay and perks of public employee unions. But in my articles on unions, I guess one of them is called The Inherent Violence of Unions. and it teaches a basic economic lesson that the only way a union could actually increase wages above what you would get on the free market is to somehow prevent competing workers, non-union workers, from competing for the jobs, because after all, if they go on strike, an employer can just hire replacement workers. And so I quoted a big, long study by the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania on the history of union violence in America, and it's something like a 600-page book. And it documents how, for generations, labor unions in America have used, murder, mayhem, stoning, stabbing, every kind of violence imaginable, perpetrated against non-union workers, not the company. The company is not the main enemy. The main enemy is always the competing workers. And so I just made the point that this is an inherent feature of unions. It's the only way they can keep monopoly wages. And unions are basically labor cartels, but the government exempts them from the antitrust laws, and they're even exempted from a lot of forms of violence that you and I would be prosecuted for, as long as they do it in the name of improving wages and working conditions.
But Tom, we could say, though, that, well, this is all very unfortunate, these aspects of unionism, but the fact is that if we didn't have unions, then employers would have no incentive to pay people more than 10 cents an hour. And so, yeah, we have to take the good with the bad. The unions have, I mean, for example, we had much more unionism in the past, and workers seem to be making more progress than they're making now without unions. So, what would you say to that?
Well, that's a version of the Marxist subsistence theory of wages. It says that employers would only pay the workers just enough to keep them alive and trudging back to the factory every day. But, of course, history disproves that, because wages in America, wages rose by 3 to 5% ever since the Constitution was ratified. And after, in the post-Civil War years, it stepped up another percentage point or two because of free labor and because of the enormous amount of capital investment that was occurring. And so if you look at history, we see the improvement of wages and working conditions and a reduction in hours worked that happened for generations before unions had any real effectiveness, or before government came in and passed any laws that could codify any of this. And so you need to understand that the main cause, as economics teaches us, of rising wages in history has been capital investment. That increases the marginal productivity of labor, and competition between employers forces employers to offer their productive employees more money, or else they lose them to competitors. It's not that they became charitable, but competition forced them to raise wages in order to compete. And so that is the actual history of the American economy disproves that particular myth about labor unions.
But what if you have a situation like we have now, where there's so many immigrants coming that the supply of labor is so great, then maybe this phenomenon doesn't work out quite as neatly as it would in a more closed labor system?
Yeah, well, what needs to be done, government regulates and taxes capital so much, especially in the era of Dodd-Frank and in these other laws that are just destroying capital markets, and the sort of the de facto nationalization of capital markets that has happened is, the way to improve wages of the new immigrants is the same way that the old immigrants had their wages improved. Advances in human capital development, which is education, training, and so forth, and of course the government screws that up badly, but also capital investment in technology. And but as the more government intervenes in capital markets and in the regulation of technology, the slower will be economic growth, and the more difficult it will be for all the new immigrants to make a decent living.
Tom, we were a little late in getting you on. Will you be able to stay over into the next segment?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So we've got about, let's say I gave you a minute. Could you, in 1 minute, refute a bumper sticker I saw about the weekend brought to you by labor unions?
I don't know. The only way you can make more money and work fewer hours is through increased productivity, and the main cause of increased worker productivity is capital investment. And so that in a sense, it's the workers who free ride on the risk-taking and investments of the capitalists.
So if anything, yeah, right. So my view on this has been that if they're going to make an argument like this, then if anything, it could be turned against the left, that if anything, the workers should be paying a kickback to the owners for investing in the capital, right? So I wouldn't go, yeah,
They should at least be grateful for it and don't believe the union propaganda that spews hatred toward their employer as the source of their affluence.
Right. Because I deal with a lot of people who say that labor is the fundamental ingredient in production, and so they deserve an extra subsidy. And I would say, well, but if it was just them working with their bare hands, they sure wouldn't produce a whole heck of a lot. All right, Tom, stand by for a minute. I want to come back at the other side of this break. There's so much to talk about in organized crime. What about under free markets, monopolies will swallow us all up. We'll all be dead because the monopolists will be at our throats. How do we deal with that? That's next on The Peter Schiff Show. Stick around.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter The Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on.
Call in now. 855-4-SCHIFF.
That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories,
Your freedom.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody, to the second hour of The Peter Schiff Show. Tom Woods filling in for Peter today. Joined by Thomas DiLorenzo, professor of economics at Loyola University in Maryland, author of, I think it's over a dozen books at this point, and we're talking in particular today about his most recent book, Organized Crime, The Unvarnished Truth About Government. Tom, I chose these topics just that we would talk about, even though there are a gazillion in your book, just because I think they're the ones that school children are most likely to hear repeated, and so I think the topic that you've done so much important pioneering work on is antitrust, and this is one of these areas people think, well, surely this is an intervention we need. Maybe we need to reform it a little bit, but obviously the free market, as Marx said, is going to lead to greater and greater concentrations of wealth, and the rest of us will be mere peons. How do you deal with people who are stuck in that kind of mentality?
Well, that's the Fed and antitrust are like two things that most people know nothing at all about. Although Ron Paul did a great service in educating millions about the Fed, but the standard story that everyone is told is that in the late 19th century, the American economy was becoming rampantly monopolized, and the government came to the rescue with the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890 to regulate these monopolies and protect us consumers from monopoly. And that always sounded like a fishy story to me. So I published an article in an academic journal called the International Review of Law and Economics way back in 1984. And I showed in that article that the industries that were being accused of monopolizing industry were cutting prices several times faster than the price level was falling at the time. This was a period of price deflation. And also they were expanding production, some of them 10 times faster than GDP, for an entire decade prior to the 1890 Sherman Antitrust Act. So what was going on was a targeting of the most productive, the most dynamic, the most competitive industries in America by the sour grapes losers who could not compete, and they simply ran to politics. They ran to the government to try to do something about these falling prices and expanding output and the invention of new products. So antitrust was a protectionist law from the very beginning. And, there have been many books written about antitrust regulation by economists. And for 110, 115 years, they say it hasn't really worked out too well. It's been counterproductive. But part of the myth is that, but at the beginning, it was a good idea. Well, I think I've pretty much proved that, no, it was never a good idea. It was always a protectionist racket, just exactly the opposite of what school children are taught, if they're taught anything at all about it.
Well, what about more recent history? I mean, can you think of some more recent examples of? I mean, I think antitrust has retreated a bit, the antitrust establishment, partly because of the work that you and Dom Armentano have done. I don't think it's as bad or as unreasonable as it used to be, and yet maybe I'm wrong about that.
You're right. It's not. I think thanks to scholarship that has been taking place for the past 30 years or more, that the antitrusters have taken a step back. You know, late in the Carter administration, it was so out of control that the Democrat-controlled Congress actually defunded the Federal Trade Commission because it was doing such outrageous things. And so, yeah, you're right about that. But look at the Microsoft antitrust case. The Microsoft Corporation was investigated for 4 years by the Bush administration, and they found that they were doing nothing wrong. And then they had the Federal Trade Commission look at them, and then the Justice Department look at them, and they finally went and sued Microsoft. But then what happened was the Microsoft's competitors were revealed or outed as being behind the lawsuit. They hired all these consultants, including Robert Bork, the late Robert Bork, who was very well known in the field, and they actually constructed the actual case that was put against Microsoft by the government. But then in the end, the judge in the case was so biased that he was kicked off the case by the three panel of federal judges that appointed him because he was so biased. He actually gave a magazine interview where he compared Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, to Al Capone, and so but the government, to save face, made them pay a small penalty, and that was the end of it.
Our guest is Tom DiLorenzo, author of Organized Crime: The Unvarnished Truth About Government. When you look at the different topics you've got in here, I mean, it's all politically incorrect, fun stuff, like the myth of the male-female wage gap, the myth of government job creation, and so on and on, all the way to the myth of the independent Fed, how central banking hides the cost of war. I mean, this is stuff you're not supposed to be taught. But let's hit a little bit, though, on this male-female wage gap thing, because you had Walter Block come speak at your university, and he said some politically incorrect things about the male-female alleged wage gap, and he got into some trouble. And then when he got back to his home university where everybody was yelling at him for saying these things, he challenged anyone in the whole university to come debate him. And, of course, every one of them is a coward. So instead, he just gave a public lecture on it, and no one dared to question him.
Right. He gave a very mainstream lecture. You know, Walter Block was a student of Gary Becker at Columbia University many years ago. He was his dissertation advisor. And Gary Becker's doctoral dissertation in Chicago was entitled The Economics of Discrimination. So Walter Block's lecture at my university was very mainstream about the male-female wage gap primarily. And, basically if you control for such things as marriage, which affects men and women differently, and choice of occupation and age and education and experience, then the wage gap is very minimal, very, very small. He didn't say there's no such thing as wage discrimination or misogynists don't exist in the world or anything like that. But the standard economics of this is that if there is exploitation of women in wages, it provides a profit opportunity for competing employers. If a woman can work for you and produce $100,000 a year in revenue, but you pay her $10,000, well, it's worth your competitor's while to offer her $20,000, $30,000, or $50,000, and he'll still make a big profit by having her working for you. So Walter Block explained and gave a really state-of-the-art lecture on this topic. But what he did was he ruffled the feathers of the politically correct academic establishment, because one of their chief superstitions is that racism and sexism are immutable. They are unchangeable, and they explain everything in society, including all the wage differences between men and women. And the president of my university, Brian Lenane, actually committed a huge act of libel. He libeled Walter Block by sending out an email to all the faculty, students, and alumni apologizing for the insensitivity. He used the word insensitivity of Walter Block, but he did not say what Walter Block said that was insensitive because, of course, he was not at the lecture. And so that's how the Marxian multiculturalists, as they call themselves, behave in academia today.
And of course, if this really were just a matter of bad men just don't want to hire women, and somehow the good men don't realize, well, wait a minute, I could save 30% hiring women if I just did that. I mean, even assuming that were plausible, how can you possibly account for the fact that there basically is no male-female wage gap with single, never-married women and single, never-married men? When you compare apples and apples, you don't compare men with women who have been out of the labor force and now half their experience is they're rusty, or it's no longer relevant, or there are whole fields they can't enter because they can't interrupt that field for pregnancy. How could it be? Is that just a great coincidence?
Yeah. Well, I have no trouble explaining this to the female students in my undergraduate classes, the 19 and 20-year-old female students. I ask them, well, say you and Joe sitting next to you here both graduate with a degree in accounting. You both pass the CPA exam, get the exact same score, and you go out and work for 5 or 6 years. And then Joe keeps at it, working for the accounting firm. But you have 3 children, and you drop out of the labor force for 10 years, and then you go back to your accounting job. Would you be expected to be paid exactly the same as Joe, who has 10 years more experience than you? And of course not. They all think it would be grossly unfair if they came back and were paid the same as Joe. And that's all Walter Block was saying. But like I said, it's part of the politically correct mantra. You can't even bring this up. That the people were outraged that anyone would suggest that anything but discrimination could possibly account for wage differences. And it really is an ignorant point of view and an attack on academic freedom. But, in today's academic world, I really looked into this. I was wondering, how did the Jesuits, I teach at a Jesuit school, go from champions of academic freedom to censors? And they're basically followers of the Marxist Herbert Marcuse, a well-known academic, who postulated back in the 60s that only the oppressed in society deserve free speech. And, of course, the oppressors do not. And so he provided a justification for the crackdown on free speech on college campuses in the name of sort of the pop Marxism. And so that's what we face today in the academic world.
Well, Tom, unfortunately we're out of time, but I want to thank you for your time today and, of course, for this great book and all your great books. I appreciate you being here.
My pleasure, and have a great day.
All right, everybody, that's Thomas DiLorenzo, author most recently of Organized Crime, The Unvarnished Truth About Government. All right, more unvarnished truths about government coming up after this break, where we'll be taking your calls at 855-4-SHIFT. That's 855-472-4433. Let's hear from you on the Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio.
The Peter Schiff Show.
You're now enrolling in the Peter Schiff School of Advanced Economics.
Twice the education of a Harvard MBA.
For 1/168,000th the cost.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Peter Schiff Show. Tom Woods filling in for Peter today. We just spoke to Tom DiLorenzo about his book, Organized Crime, The Unvarnished Truth About Government. You can read that book for free. The age of the Internet. You don't have to pay 1 cent. If you want a hard copy, you can buy one. But you can get a PDF of that book and just read it on your device. And I posted a link to that at tomwoods.com. And none of my April 1st posts are jokes. All right, this isn't going to take you to Rick Astley singing Never Gonna... What the heck is that song that people send you to? can't remember. But anyway, check out Tom's book. You'll really like it. It can be read in little pieces. It's just a whole bunch of little essays answering the sorts of things that you hear said about the free market or a free society, and he just answers them. So check that out, tomwoods.com. Also, I got some events coming up. This Saturday, April 6th, I'm going to be speaking at Texas Tech University, so I hope to see you folks in Lubbock. April 13th in Dubuque, Iowa, and I'm going to be speaking between 1 and 4 p.m., so you still have your whole Saturday night to go out and get drunk. But I'm going to be talking about the economy, not the usual, we need lower taxes and lower regulation. Yep, step 1. I got like step 817. So state nullification and then foreign policy. We're going to talk to, this is put on by the Iowa GOP, featuring me, believe it or not. And then April 20th, Kansas State University. I'm keynoting the Young Americans for Liberty State Convention. That's open to the public. You can come whether you're a member or not. And then May 4th, I'm going to be in St. Paul at O'Gara's around 6:30 p.m. We're going to have a great time there, not just because it's a bar. I'm going to make it, it's going to be funny. My jokes get funnier if you drink, but they're still all right. So we'll have some fun then. And then I'm supposed to be in Milwaukee at the Wisconsin Forum May 14th. So I've got information on these and other events over at my site, tomwoods.com. Let's go to the phones now. Never Gonna Give You Up. That's why the producer fed this to me. Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley. That's what I'm looking for. All right, let's go now to the phones and talk to Darren in California. Darren, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
Hey, Tom. How's it going?
Good.
Hey, a question about you had a guest on when you were hosting before from a company called BitInstant about the Bitcoins, and I've since been watching it, and when I started watching it, it was at $48 today. I'm watching it, it's at $101. Just wondering what your take is on Bitcoin now. I asked Peter what he thought. He thought that anything that volatile was, kind of suspect, but it sure seems like a lot, especially what's going on in Europe, a lot of people are moving into this thing, and just kind of want to get your take on it now, and if you've purchased any yourself, and if you have, how you went about doing that, because I've checked into it, and it looks like there's about 3 different entities that you have to deal with to purchase those things at market price, unless you want to buy them retail, which has a big markup. So Anyway,
okay.
Just want to get your take.
All right, thanks, Darren, for that question. I mean, I'm still to say I'm a novice at this is an understatement. It's a difficult topic. It's a complicated thing. Even when you think you've got your head wrapped around it, it's still tricky. I mean, I would tend to be sympathetic with Peter here. I mean, not to say that you should absolutely avoid it, but as even Eric Voorhees, who was our guest to talk about Bitcoin, indicated to me when I first met him. He said, I think you should, of course, be cautious. This is still an experimental thing, and you should have only a certain percentage of your portfolio in it, and maybe that should be 10%, maybe it should be 1%, maybe it should be less than 1%. I mean, it depends on how risk-averse you are. Now, in terms of my own, and I think I've got like 1 plus a fraction Bitcoin. So I think I can say, as somebody who has no real skin in this game, as completely impartial, I got, because I sold a book or two for Bitcoins back in late February at an event. I was talked into it. Look, I'll buy you a book. I'll buy a book from you if you'll offer it in Bitcoin. So look, if you start off a sentence with "I'll buy a book from you," I'm pretty much salivating. I'll do whatever you say. So I set up the thing on the phone, and that was when Bitcoins were back at $30, and so now apparently they're up to 100, just based on what I saw this morning on the computer. So obviously that is very volatile. On the other hand, if it were to fall all the way back down to 50, I'm still ahead 20. So it doesn't really hurt me any, and especially being so little involved in it, one way or the other, it's not going to matter to me what happens to it. So, I'm taking a kind of a wait-and-see approach. I think one reason that it's going to be volatile, just one of the reasons, is simply that when you're dealing with something like Bitcoin where you've got the potential for a great many people to use it, but right now, it's the number of people using it as compared to the whole human race is pretty negligible. But if you had a lot of people using it, it would not be so volatile. Just like money, for example. You do see precious metals moving around, but when they circulated as money, which meant everybody was using them in every market, they were not volatile at all. So the more widespread Bitcoin becomes, the less volatile it will be. Because it's just being used all the time, regularly. Same way precious metals were used when they circulated as coins that were used as money. So we'll see. I would just say just be cautious. Use common sense. If you're risk averse, sit on the sidelines and watch for a while, or get 1 Bitcoin and what could that hurt, right? And just see what happens. Transact in it, practice with it a little bit, and see if it suits your purposes, I suppose. But in terms of acquiring Bitcoins, since I got them just in exchange for a product, I didn't have to go through the various hoops. So I'm not knowledgeable about that. I've just sent you over to weusecoins.org for explanations on that. Okay, we are starting to get other calls, but we still have room for yours at 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-472-4433. I'd like to talk to you guys more when we come back from this break. So you are listening to the Peter Schiff Show going into the last half hour, so don't go away.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Now return to the Peter Schiff Show.
Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF.
That's 855-472-4433.
Rebel Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to the final half hour of the Peter Schiff Show today. Tom Woods filling in for Peter. Let's go over to the phones now, which you can join, by the way. 855-4-SCHIFF is the number, 855-472-4433. And we're going to talk to Chris in Charleston, South Carolina. Chris, you're on the Peter Schiff Show.
Hi, Tom. First, I want to start by thanking you for the good work that you do, because you do a great job, and I follow your work, and I just think it's phenomenal.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I had 2 points. I don't know if you want me to go 1, 2, back to back, or
let's hear both points at once, please.
All right. Well, my first point is, I've heard it said that a communist community can exist within a libertarian society, but that a libertarian community cannot exist within a communist society, and that leads me to the question: why don't we try having a libertarian society with communist communities within it? In other words, I think it's an achievable platform for either Republicans or Libertarians to push for, actually publicly push for, just simply shifting the welfare state back to the states. Not saying let's eradicate welfare, because that's just not going to pass any kind of election. That's not going to get through any kind of election. But if you frame the argument, and why don't we just let states control their own welfare system? Then you'll probably end up with a lot of states with very libertarian economies, and then probably what you would end up happening is seeing juxtapositions of economies that are more socialist failing and libertarian type style economies that are passing, that are doing great. And so I'd like to know what your comment is about that, if there's something that's not allowing that to happen. And the other point I wanted to make was about the advantages that the socialist, communist style Democrat leaders, the advantage that they have over libertarian type elected officials in their message to the public, and it's right spelled out right in Hayek, where Hayek in Economics in One Lesson talks about how it's very easy for a politician to stand up and say, let's build roads and bridges, and then all of a sudden the electorate envisions a road and a bridge, because you can see you can actually see what they're talking about. And even though we know it's bad for the economy, the electorate just sees the vision, and they don't see the invisible destruction that's going on. So what I would propose what we do is turn that around and say, figure out a way to show proactively what a welfare-less state would look like. Show proactively what we can do with modern technology, modern communication systems to improve and enhance charitable organizations and organize and have them organized maybe even on a national level in some way, shape, or form through, I don't know, there's probably some way to do it where politicians can organizations to say free organizations, private organizations, and say, this is what our goals are as a nation, and how we can achieve that. So those were kind of my two ideas, and I just want to throw them out there because I've never really heard anybody explain to me why we can't have a state by state, states choose their own welfare systems, completely control their own welfare systems, and so I just kind of let you finish up. I just wanted to throw. I know there's two big ideas.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, Chris. Thanks for that call. Your second idea seems fine to me. The first issue, there are some people who have tried to do that, and the Clinton welfare reform in '96 was supposed to do that, was supposed to turn welfare more or less over to the states, but of course there were always strings attached, and of course they never mean all of welfare. They never mean food stamps, all of Medicaid. They never mean the major transfer programs. They never mean. You could just go down the list. The federal Job Corps, whatever it is, they never really mean let the states deal with those issues or have control of them. They never really mean that. So they talk about it, but it never actually happens. But you can find people who give lip service to that, but it never really comes to pass. But I certainly would consider that to be a step in the right direction. Some states would do things that are worse than the federal government is doing now. Vermont, I'm looking in your direction, and some states would maybe do things that are better, and then people could sort of sort themselves out naturally according to where they prefer to live. That absolutely seems fine to me. Let's talk now. Now, the caller mentioned that a lot of times when government spends money, it has a kind of advantage over the politician or the other guy who doesn't want to spend the money, because they can say, look, we built this bridge. This bridge is sitting right here in front of you. This other guy didn't want to build this bridge. So if this other guy had had his way, there'd be nothing here. And as Henry Hazlitt says in Economics in One Lesson, you can see with your physical eyes that bridge, but you can see only with your mind's eye the things that would have existed had this bridge not siphoned resources off from other places. And it's a lot harder to appeal to the average voter's mind's eye than to appeal to his physical eye. Well, there's a story just really on the cusp of events here. CNN, believe it or not, covered in an investigative report last week with its reporter Drew Griffin, was talking about high-speed rail. Now, here's a case this has been pushed by Obama year after year. We need high-speed rail, and these other people don't want high-speed rail. So your choice is high-speed rail or no high-speed rail, and that's the only way you should think about it. Well, what's interesting is that even on its own terms, the high-speed rail has not been successful. So it's not even like, well, okay, you can point to high-speed rail, and I can point to things that we would have spent the money on if we hadn't had the high-speed rail. They can't even point to the high-speed rail. So $12 billion have been spent on high-speed rail. They don't have anything to show for it. So here's Anderson Cooper. Again, not a guy I appeal to much, but here's, in cut number 5, here's Anderson Cooper setting up this segment.
High-speed rail is a key component of President Obama's domestic policy. Now, 4 years ago, he announced with great fanfare that his administration was using $8 billion in stimulus funds as seed money to get high-speed rail projects off the ground. An additional $1 billion would then be spent annually. The president even mentioned high-speed rail again in his State of the Union address just last month, saying that it should be part of a key part of repairing America's aging infrastructure. But keep it in mind, billions in federal tax dollars have been spent so far with very little to show for it. 360 has been investigating some of these projects, like the billions spent in California without one shovel being put into the ground, or the tens of millions spent on high-speed rail in mountainous Vermont, where very few people ride trains to begin with. Tonight, our investigation focuses on a project in the Pacific Northwest that cost a lot. You can decide if that expenditure was worth it. Here's Drew Griffin.
All right, now let's in fact go to Drew Griffin. He's going to be reporting on a recent speech by outgoing Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood. Ray LaHood was a Republican. He's a classic example of the government functionary, and he answers questions like a government functionary. So this is Griffin reporting on a speech by Ray LaHood.
In a half-filled conference room, Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood tried to rally hope that his dream and the president's dream of high-speed rail would become a reality. But that dream, shared by those here who stand to make money from high-speed rail, is turning into a pipe dream.
This has been an extraordinary 4 years for high-speed rail.
What is extraordinary is just how much money federal taxpayers have dumped into high-speed rail while the trains are still slow. 4 years and $12 billion after that pledge to bring high-speed rail across America, the slow trains are just moving a little faster.
All right. Now, let's go to cut number 7, because now we're going to talk to the head of Washington State's Transportation Agency, Paula Hammond, and you're going to hear the incredible advances we've made in high-speed rail.
Paula Hammond was the state's transportation secretary until recently retiring. Washington State got $800 million from the federal government. That's your tax money, mainly for improving the track between Seattle and Portland. And what did you get for it? Over a 3-hour and 40-minute ride, the trip has been reduced by 10 minutes.
10 minutes doesn't sound like a lot of time, but when you think about the fact that you have more options for more round trips, that you know that the train will come and go reliably and on time, that to us is what our passengers tell us is the most important thing.
All aboard! In fact, 10 minutes isn't a lot of time. And Paul...
All right, yeah, no, it's not. Now, then she goes on to say that, I don't know if we'll ever really want high-speed rail, high-speed rail. What we want We want the ability for our communities to be connected so we can provide good travel, a daily business. Okay, so in other words, bait and switch. We didn't really want high-speed rail to start with. All right. Obama said what we're talking about is a vision for high-speed rail in America in 2009, and what we've gotten is 134 scattered projects across the country that have mostly made slow trains a little faster. But now finally, I got to just play you cuts numbers 10 and 11, and then we're going to go to a break. You got to hear Ray LaHood answering questions. Only a government official could answer questions like this. Let's hear cut number 10 and 11 back to back, please.
After his speech to the High Speed Rail Association, we were given a brief interview with outgoing Secretary of Transportation Ray LaHood.
I'm wondering, after 4 years and $12 billion spent, if you're disappointed at where high-speed rail is. Where is the high-speed rail?
The high-speed rail, in 4 years, we've invested $12 billion. That's just the federal money.
But so much of the money has been spent really making the old trains go a little bit faster. Seattle to Portland.
Oh, I think 110 is pretty fast.
But Seattle to Portland, you've spent $800 million, and the trip time has been reduced by 10 minutes.
Well, I think people like the investments we're making.